Hi, it's Marie at LivingFelt. This video is all about choosing the best color of hair and fur for your realistic people and animal portraits and sculptures. We know how important it is for you to get the right colors of fur and hair when you're working on your felted projects. We know because you email and call us and ask us which colors or which wool to use for those projects. Today, we are going to look at a range of colors and help you create blends that will really bring your felt portraits and sculptures to life. We're going to give you tips and methods for creating a color swatch library that will become your go-to for getting the right color every time. We'll also share some worksheets and templates that you can download for your own studio notebook and refer to them again and again. These methods are really easy and anyone can do them. They're really going to build your level of confidence in getting the right colors for your project, and we hope that you have fun using them. The main fibers we'll be working with today are 19.5 micron merino top, and specifically we're working with our Wild and Tame Hair and Mane pack in fine. The same methods that we're sharing with you will also work with our Wild and Tame Hair and Mane medium pack, which is slightly more coarse and the fibers have a little more kink. They're also a little bit longer. You can use these same methodologies if you're working with batting. The blending will just be a slightly different experience. One of the keys to getting a good color match is first having a really great image. Let's look at a few examples. Here's a great photo of the dog we're going to be working with today, and here's an example of the paper version. In person, the paper version is much more muted and the photo version is much more warm. We're going to want to go for the highlights and warm tones and lowlights that we see in this photograph. Our printers, our paper, and our ink can really change the quality of the photos and affect the final colors. These are two examples of photos that I printed on my printer, and they look completely different. For this image, I would instead choose to use a photograph printed at the local pharmacy. These dogs are both golden retrievers, but they have different colors. So whenever people call us and ask us to choose a color for an animal, we always ask to see a photo. Do your best to get a few photos of the animal, and if you can, print them out into a larger format. You might also find it helpful to cut them out if the background is very busy and competes with your eyes while you're trying to hone in on particular shades of the animal. In some cases, the background is really supportive of putting the subject in the foreground, and you may not need to cut it out. But this also shows a great example of how different the colors look between printed on paper and printed in a professional photo. This one will give us a much truer representation of the animal we want to create. Once you have your image selected and you're happy with the representation of the subject you're going to be creating, we like to use the focus window to help us hone in on a small area of our subject and really evaluate the colors we're seeing. The coat is going to vary from different parts of the animal. Another tool that's really helpful is to use a focus window for our color palette. And it depends on whether you're wanting to see 3 colors or 4 colors or 5 colors. You might even be looking for just 2. Isolating these in a small window can help you evaluate the color match of your fibers to your subject. To create my little focus window, I simply used a little craft punch. The only challenge with these things is they only go in so far, but you just slide the paper into the punch however far you want it and compress. And you'll make yourself some little view holes. I found it kind of a challenge to line them up and get them right where I want, but you can just go all the way into the paper and line them all up that way. The colors we see in this animal could be seen in many species of animals, but you might also find in human hair. Because these colors might be ones that you want to use in a variety of projects, we're going to get started by creating our color swatch library. The tools for creating our color swatch library are really very simple. Bring all the fibers that you think you want to work with. Some plain felt in any color, but neutral will be very supportive. We have key tags that come with stickers. These are ID badge clasps, and this is a miniature cookie cutter and a pen or marking tool. If you don't want to handwrite all of your names, you could also opt to use a label maker, but in some cases my blends are too big, so I decided to be consistent and will be handwriting all of our tags. The last things you'll need are a felt pad and a felting needle. I'm using a 42 triangle fine. To make a swatch library, the first thing I do is create swatches of all of the solids. We're just going to take a full staple length of our fiber, and it can be as thick or thin as you like. I like mine to be just a fair medium thickness, about like this. And a staple length is the full length of the fiber as it's shorn off the animal. This is very fine and all going one direction, so I'll just twist the end together so that it gets a little bit flattened, and then actually tie it in a knot. This is going to be secured by our little ID badge holder. So now we have a little swatch. It can be very helpful to put the name on the swatch, and that's why I've brought in these little key tags. Because these ID badges have a little hole, it's very easy to attach them. If this is all you did, you would have a great color reference library for whatever fibers you have. But we do have a few more ideas to share. I find it really helpful to have little swatches of what that fiber will look like when it's felted. It doesn't matter whether it's wet felted or needle felted. Once it's compact and no longer all going in the same direction, this little swatch is going to give you an idea of what it will look like in your project. You can make yours large or small. To create mine, I like to use a little wool felt base and a miniature cookie cutter. Take your fiber and pull off a few little lengths. Because the staple length of this fiber is a little bit longer than maybe some of our batting like our MC1, the Maori, or the Berkshire, I prefer to cut it when making these little needle felted swatches. You can use your LivingFelt fiber shears or whatever you have that you like to cut fiber with, and I cut them to about 1 inch. Mix them up so they're going in all different directions. In this way, you're actually making your own little tiny bat. To save my felt, I like to work from the corner and just tuck it all in there and needle felt following those corners. These little biscuit or cookie cutters are really safe to use because the walls are so high. So even if you take your attention off it for a second, you don't have to lift your needle very high, and it's not going to come out so you don't hit the rim. The other thing I like to do, just to keep my samples all looking tidy, is cut them all to the same length. Otherwise, it gets really messy and all the tails want to collide together. So this is optional if you want to see the natural taper or length of your fiber, but I find this makes my ring of samples look really tidy. Once you have all of your solid fibers labeled and tagged for your color swatch library, it's a great time to make your 1-to-1 or 50-50 blends. We're going to start with these two colors right here, Marrakesh and Copper. For creating our 50-50 blends, we want to start with approximately the same amount of 2 different colors. We'll just be hand blending these since the amounts are so small. And if you feel like you got your ratio wrong, you can always go back and add a little more of one or the other. This is just going to be our reference tool for our swatch library. So I stacked the 2 colors together, and then you can alternate all of those colors in one little division. To blend, we're just going to pull and stack. Pull and stack, pull and stack. And just keep alternating them so all of the fibers get nice and blended. It can be as homogenized or as stripy as you like. Here, since we're trying to create a new color, we're going to get it fairly blended. We don't want to rip or tear the fibers, so always just put your hands as far apart as you can get away with as you're doing the pull. This would be the same even if you were working with shorter fibers that might be prepared into a batting or roving. Take a small amount of your blend and make sure to create a color swatch and a tag for each as you make them. We've created our first blend in a 1-to-1 ratio using Marrakesh and copper. Now let's see what happens when we warm it up a little bit more by adding burnt orange. This is going to be a tri-blend, so equal amounts of all three of these colors. Compared to the 50-50 blend we made just a moment ago with copper and Marrakesh, we now have a much warmer version by adding in the burnt orange. The other thing that happens when you make a blend, you go from these solid, more flat colors to highlights and lowlights, and it really starts to bring that new color palette to life. "50-50 blends will serve you in a lot of areas, but sometimes you really want to take something and make it just a little bit warmer. So by bringing in the burnt orange into this, we can take the same blend that we already had and give it a lot more warmth without going all the way to the extreme of putting burnt orange into our piece. Here's a look at just some of the 50-50 blends you can make from this pack. Right away, you've created 7 new colors that didn't exist in your color palette before, and these will really help you get a lot of depth and interest in your felt pieces. One other idea that you might find helpful is taking a small tuft of the 2 colors that you blended and storing them on the back of the hybrid blend. That way you get a quick reference of the colors you used as opposed to just looking at the name. If you're doing a subject with long fur or where you want to really see the striations, this part of your little color swatch is really going to come in handy. But if you're needle felting something flat or wet felting and you want to see what the color blend looks like once it's really entangled together, this little swatch is going to be really useful to you. I haven't found a really easy way to mark these little swatches, so I never let them get too far from their brothers here, but you can see that you can get quite liberated if you want to pull these little swatches off and match them to your project all on their own. Using just these solids and these 1-to-1 and 3-way blends, you could have a lot of depth and interest in your projects, and you can create a lot more blends with these colors. One tip when you're working on your felt pieces is to use whites and blacks sparingly. Instead, consider blends or really close colors. This is white sand. It's not our whitest white, which is lily white at this time, but white sand is more of a natural white that you would find in animals. And then we've created a 50-50 blend on the way to white peach. So instead of going white, start with one of these when you look at the light tones of your subject, and the same thing with black. Black you can blend with gray, and you can blend coffee and black together. And it's difficult to see these blends on the screen here, but trust me that you can blend these together, and you can even get some of your darks sometimes from the browns or brown-black blends instead of going all the way to black. The other color you can add into the mix is slate and create some blends with slate so that you save your blacks for the deepest, darkest parts of your image. In this example, we have coffee, which is a dark brown, coffee and black together, ebony, which is black, a mixture of ebony and slate by itself. So just by adding these 2 blends, you get a little more variation. And this one might be difficult to see on the computer, but you can always add a little bit of dark or add a little bit of the lighter brown wherever you're needing to move that color. We have 26 colors here from our original 14, and there are so many more blends we could make. But let's bring our friend in and see what colors are in his coat. Looking at all of these colors in our palette and all of the colors in our dog, it can be a little overwhelming on knowing where to start. We can use our little view window and hone in or focus in on certain parts of the coat and find those in our color palette. We're going to use our little focus window to concentrate our view on just a portion of the dog's coat. Looking at this, I see the primary blend would be our Marrakesh and copper blend. It gets golden, warm tones, and brown tones all in one. For highlights, you might like the Sandcastle and Marrakesh blend. A little bit lighter, capturing some highlights. And for the primary lowlights, straight up barnwood could serve very well. Areas that are a little lighter and a little darker. For darker, we can bring in beaver, and I probably wouldn't go any darker than what I see in beaver right here. For the very lightest parts, like right here, you might try something like white peach, or you could try a blend, which is just a little bit softer and probably looks a little more natural for this dog. And this one is white peach and sandcastle together. Moving our focus window to a different part of our dog, we can see in here some very shadowy spots. And of course, you can add a little bit of brown, but for the main color, I would use this blend, which is Marrakesh and Barnwood. So it's not a solid color. And then here, we feel like we're seeing a little bit of red, and this is a tri-blend, which is copper, sandcastle, and Marrakesh. We're using other colors from our previous selection that we chose over here on the body, but for the lightest parts, we do get quite light, and so we're using white sand and white peach. As we look at this picture, we feel like this blend is very common throughout. There's definitely some red in this dog, and I think a little of it is muted in the photo, so you can vary it depending on the picture of your animal, but it feels like these red or warm tones really need to be in some of these blends. This blend we've chosen is copper, sandcastle, and Marrakesh. Two blends in their blended form might look really close together. And so you're going to find that you use a little more red or a little more golden in whatever blend you're hand making. But if you're needle felting something flat, use these little swatches and you can see just a slight difference between the blend you're making when you've needle felted something flat. This is going to be very telling and will help you really compare how these colors look together when they've been felted. One of the things I notice looking here at the feet is they get very, very neutral. It's not warm. It doesn't feel red. It doesn't feel golden. It just feels very neutral. I'm bringing in Sandalwood, Barnwood, and Beaver to reach for these hues and some blends of each to capture the variegation. I started with 2/3 Sandcastle and 1/3 Beaver, and I feel like I'm starting to get towards the hue of these darker areas, but what we need is a little bit more warmth. So now I'm going to bring in the Barnwood. I'll save back a pinch of this as reference. I think this blend matches the lowest shadows of the foot right here and would work really, really well. For these top portions, I probably go a little more warm so that we capture some of the golden hue. We took our time doing just a few blends really and put together a really complex blend to get as close as we could to seeing the natural colors in that paw pad. When you want to add a little sheen to a color or a blend, you might consider bringing in some of our luster fibers. Specifically, I've brought in some viscose. It has a great sheen to it, and it's just really nice to work with. So this is Copper and Marrakesh, a blend we made earlier. This is Copper in viscose, so it's going to add a bit of color, and you might think of that before you make a blend, but it will also add a bit of sheen. So I'll blend about half and half and add just so you can see. It's really the same to work with. Depending on the fibers that you have, they might have different staple lengths. If you're going to be needle felting things flat, like in our little needle felted portions, you can cut them and blend them and mix them up going in all directions. But if you're doing a longer fiber or coat, you might want all the striations going in the same direction. For some of your creations, it may not be relevant, but if you were doing like a Yorkie or an Irish setter, or maybe even a show horse, you might find that you really want some sheen in that coat. And it might be a little challenging to find the exact right color, but just use the blend skills that you've gained and try and create some blends so that you can add a little bit of sheen to the coat or hair that you're working into your felt piece. Working on hair, whether that's for a 2D portrait or for a doll, can be challenging to make it look lively and lifelike rather than just flat. So find an inspiration image for the hair colors that you would like to model and apply the same techniques that we did with our golden retriever. In looking at this picture, our isolation window can help us hone in on a particular area of the hair. Let's choose one that has a lot of dynamics to it. This hair is a very ash brown and has some very dark areas and some very light areas and some golden areas. And then this is more towards the ash. To some degree, the colors are going to get blended as you apply them to your work of art. And you can achieve these thin stripes by applying small amounts of each color at a time versus trying to blend them and getting an overly homogenized blend. Go for the highlights, the midtones, and the lowlights. These three colors closely represent what we see in this window. But what we would like to see is a blend or a middle point between these two and a middle point between these two. To further evaluate the closeness of the highlights, midtones, and lowlights that you've chosen, use your color view windows to isolate those colors and give them a little closer look. These look very much like what we see in this little window. What will be really helpful is to have blends in between these two and in between these two. Go for 50-50 blends to start, and you can blend them really well or let the striation still appear in your blends. This blend is a great example of mixing to a point where you just get interest and character rather than a very homogeneous blend. You'll also get a little more dynamics if your colors are a little further apart, like we see between these two. Just by making two blends, we can really make this hair look very realistic. Blending two colors of batting is really easy. It's a best idea to have fibers that are similar in staple length to blend well. I like to always start with a 50-50 blend, and in this case, I'm going to use half thickness of the bat so that we start with a small amount. We're just gauging by eye the amount of fiber, and sometimes I just try and match the basic shape and size. That looks like a pretty good 50-50 blend. Just like working with other fibers, it's really helpful to stack them and alternate the colors when you begin to blend. Stack them together, put your hands far enough apart so that as you pull the fibers, they come apart easily. And then just stack, stack and pull, stack and pull. And you can switch your direction with a bat because bats go in many different directions. So this little blend is already getting a new hue, some new tonality, and some interest. You can take part of it as being just partially blended so that you see some nice variegation in the blend and set that aside. And then if you like, keep blending what you have. If it seems like your fibers are starting to pill, and mine are not, it's probably just that you're tearing the fibers or being a little too aggressive. So if it feels like the fibers are ripping, then just back your hands up a little bit. These are great 50-50 blends. A 50-50 blend is always a great place to start. And then you can take one a little more red, and then you can take one a little bit darker as well. This little guy is an example of needle felting an animal portrait using bats. He's from our tutorial of needle felting realistic pets. You can use the hand blending or the hand carding methods to create a picture like this. If you're wanting some videos on needle felting realistic animals, you really want to check out some of the videos in our school because the teachers are just amazing. If you're working on a larger project, it's really helpful to card or blend a larger amount. For that, we suggest using hand carders or a drum carder. A second tool that's really helpful is an inexpensive kitchen scale. When you want to know that you're truly doing a 50-50 blend, a three-way blend, or a 25% blend, it's really helpful to pre-weigh your fibers. Get a scale that measures gram or ounces, then you can get pretty small or large in your amounts. Grab a copy of the Fiber Palette worksheet linked in the description below. You can use it to record the fibers, colors, and blends that you're using for your subject. This way, you can easily store them away and refer back to them for future projects. I'm always amazed at just how many colors we can create when just blending colors that are side by side, but then we can really take it to the next level when we add a third. And please keep in mind that these one-to-one and three-way blends are just a starting point. They'll give you these small color references that you can compare through your little focus windows and give you direction of how you want to take that color where it needs to be. I'm really interested to see how you might store your own fiber palette. I can really see them hanging up on a little peg wall or being somewhere where they're individually accessible. For mine, I'll just refer back to them occasionally, so I'll store them on this keyring. We hope you'll share down below how you will use these tips and methods, and let us know what other subjects you would like us to cover in future blends. Thanks so much for joining us, y'all. We hope this was helpful. Let us know down below what were your favorite takeaways from this video. And if you're looking for more needle felting realistic animals or pet portraits, watch this video next.